Good evening, folks. This is Attorney Mark Thomsen, and welcome back to your Paul Revere Show. We are here on WAUK 540 AM 101 FM every Monday night from 7 to 8. And as y'all know, we've been really focusing on how to keep Wisconsin moving forward and what are the hot issues for democracy and what are the hot issues that we're all talking about. And usually I've had a lot of guests that have been involved either as activists or, elected representatives. Tonight I'm doing something a little different. I really want to, and I'm so happy and proud to introduce James E. Causey. Joining me tonight, a journalist. And I thought we would get the views of some of the hot issues going on in the state from the lens of a journalist. Welcome, James. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me on, Mark.
You bet. You bet. This is the first time I've had an opportunity to have you on, and many of my listeners may not know you. So before we jump into some of the hot issues that we're all looking at, would you be kind enough to just sort of share some of your life experience and, how you got to where you're at?
Sure. Well, I'm born and raised in Milwaukee. Like I said, I've been here most of my life. I lived in New York for a little while, lived in Boston for a little while, but Milwaukee has been my home for a majority of my life. Interesting fact about me, I've only had like 2 jobs in my life. I was a busboy at Sizzler Steakhouse, and my other job was working in the media. So working for the newspapers, worked for the Community Journal as a high school intern, worked at the Milwaukee Sentinel as a high school intern, interned at the Milwaukee Journal. And when I started working at the newspaper in 1987, the summer of 87, the newspaper was trying its hand at having working with a young minority student to see if they could acclimate them into a newspaper environment, because it was a different type of recruiting strategy. And I competed against, several dozens of other students and young people across the city for the position, and they hired me that summer, and it was probably the best decision I made because it turned into a lifelong career working at the newspaper, and I've been there ever since 1987. And during that time, I've covered just about everything you could imagine, from working the cop beat, covering night cops. I covered Jeffrey Dahmer. I covered a lot of those cases. I have won several awards for my writing. I've been a columnist, a projects writer, an editor, worked on copy desks, worked in the suburbs, you name it. So over a course of 30 years, I've just about covered everything that you can imagine at the newspaper. And so this is my hometown. It's my dream working for my hometown newspaper, and I'm living the best life right now. I'm enjoying it.
Thanks for sharing. A question here. What does it mean now to be working for your hometown paper in this era of everything's on the internet, live feeds, and we've seen, I'm a buyer of the paper. I still get the hard copy. I get it daily. But that paper is shrunk and it's much, much slimmer. And it seems like it's very, very hard to get the truth and the facts. That you've been there the whole change and collapse. What are your observations on that?
Well, I wouldn't call it a collapse. I wouldn't go that far. But I will say, a number of things have shrunk during that time. Automation, technology, things like that have changed, and we're doing things a lot differently than we used to. the business model of newspapers have changed. We used to depend on, the print news subscriber, but now we're in a digital age and we need digital subscribers in order to survive. Think about this, Mark. Newspapers have gone through mass amount of changes. And pre-pandemic, I'm talking just pre-pandemic, we lost 360 newspapers across the country. That means newspapers that have closed, shut down, and are no longer and will not come back. So you have a lot of communities without any local representation. When you think about that and you think about the misinformation that exists on the internet, newspapers are still the lifeblood and the most trusted source to get news from. We still have the largest newsrooms compared to other media organizations in the city and the state. And so people really need us to be that source of truth and that source of information. Unfortunately, due to politics, due to lack of trust in people receiving their news and getting into their political silos, everybody thinks that everybody is not telling the truth if you don't present their side of the story and give them the news the way that they want it. And that's where the problems come in, because I think what has happened with people is as they became more educated and they start to dig into their more and more into their own silos, they start to just seek information that they feel signified their beliefs. So if they were liberal, they sought out liberal media. If they were conservative, they sought out conservative media. And they wanted people to tell them how to think. And, as a news journalist, an old-time news journalist now, I believe in telling the truth, and I believe in being fair. And I even say that as an opinion writer today, because even though I'm an opinion writer, what I do is I still present news in a way that I think people will like it. Yes, I do give some of my opinion, but also back it up with facts. And I think that's important.
Thank you. And I do very much appreciate how difficult it is to be out there on the First Amendment side of things, telling this story, especially in the age of misinformation and disinformation. I mean, we see so much, and now we read about what AI is going to do in terms of its infinite ability to spread misinformation. Just as a heads up for the listeners and for me, what do we need to be paying attention to make sure that we're getting the truth?
Honestly, I think we should be paying attention to local politics more so than anything else. Your local politics is really what dictates what happens to you on a really quick basis. The mayor's race, the people you choose for your aldermen, the people you choose for your county boards, those people matter like you would not believe. I think we get so caught up on the presidential race, and we don't realize how much local politics play into our everyday lives, even school board races and things like that, where we have really low turnout. But those races influence how money is being distributed and how much funds are going into the classroom to educate our kids. Those are the things that we need to become better at. And as a newspaper organization or as a media organization, I think we have to present those types of stories in different ways, because everybody doesn't want to sit down and read a 30-inch news story on something like on a school board meeting. But maybe that means we have to give it to them in a video. Maybe that means we have to give it to them in 5 quick questions that they need to answer. Maybe we have to give it to them in a video. We have to come up with creative ways to get this information to the consumer and give it to them in ways that they could trust. And like I said, we're still I consider us to be the most trusted news organization in the state. We have the most people. We cover the most beats, and we're dedicated to this. We lost a lot of bodies through buyouts and people leaving the industry and retirements. But this right now, I could tell you, when I look at my newsroom and I see all these young people in there, this talent is unbelievable for what they bring to our organization and how they think outside the box on how we need to do things. And that's where we need to be headed. But there's going to always be this issue of trust and really establishing how we're trusted in the community. And one way that we could do that, and that I'm actually giving a presentation on this on Wednesday, is that reporters in the newsroom, they have to be out in the public more. We have to be in those spaces. A lot of people want journalists to come back into the newsrooms, but I really like being out among people, because that's where the stories are, and that's where I find my news stories, and that's how I get tips on different things. And I think that's where we have to get to. We have to be out there. We have to be present. We have to listen more. We have to vet people more, and we have to keep telling those stories.
I think that's a perfect intro to one of the key issues I wanted to ask you tonight. There's been all this discussion statewide, and we've been reading about it. Tony Evers presented his budget, and there have been all these discussions now with the Assembly and the Senate on shared revenue, and buried in these bills is a proposal that in return for some additional funds coming to Milwaukee, that the Fire and Police Commission is essentially going to be eliminated. And on the other side of the break, James, I really want to get into what is the Fire and Police Commission? It's been around since 1885. And how is it that in the middle of a budget talk in 2023, we're losing that institution? And I really want the journalist's eye on this question, because I don't hear much out there. It's sort of like silence. And I think you said it best. Why the silence? It's the $1 million question. And folks, we'll be back with journalist James Causey to talk about where we're at.
Can I kick it?
Welcome back, folks. This is attorney Mark Thomsen. This is your Paul Revere Show. We are here every Monday night from 7 to 8 at WAUK 540 AM 101 FM. And folks, tonight, I'm honored to have journalist James Causey with us to talk about this little hideaway provision in legislation that is now the Senate is going to end up with the governor. We're talking about shared revenue, but buried in this project, there is a proposal to eliminate and reduce the powers of the Milwaukee Fire and Police Commission. And I thought we needed a journalist's eyes on the question. And just as an intro, though, for folks that don't know it, the Fire and Police Commission in Milwaukee, it's part of the Milwaukee City Charter. It oversees all aspects of the fire department and police department, and it sets the overall policy for each chief. It establishes recruiting and testing standards for the positions in the fire and police departments. It hears all the appeals by members of either department who have been disciplined by their chief. It independently investigates and monitors citizen complaints, and it's responsible for disciplining employees for misconduct. There are 9 members currently on the Fire and Police Commission. And I just want to read briefly the history from their website. And it says the Milwaukee Board of Fire and Police Commissioners was established in 1885 by state law and is one of the oldest police oversight agencies in the nation. The commission was originally created to remove the fire and police services from the influences of politics. Until that time in Milwaukee, as in most cities, chiefs of both departments were appointed by the mayor, who used these appointments and the appointment of police officers as a form of political patronage. The new law made the Fire and Police Commission responsible for setting employment standards, testing candidates for positions in the fire police departments, and appointing both chiefs. In 1911, folks, this is forever ago, the commission's authority was expanded to include all aspects of operational oversight of the fire and police departments. The commission's authority and responsibility are set out in the Wisconsin statutes and in the Milwaukee City Charter. So, James, from the journalist's point of view, what do you think is behind this attempt to, seems to me sort of very quietly, get rid of an institution that has been in Milwaukee since 1885?
Well, honestly, I don't think it's quiet. I think what's being proposed is loud and clear. They want to get rid of it. But this is just one step in many of the steps that they're trying to get rid of. I mean, they're also looking at race-based hiring throughout the UW system and things like that as well. So I have a question. I'm going to throw this back at you, Mark, from a point
go ahead. Here we go.
Think about this. When the talk of critical race theory came up, and I've written columns on that, and saying that it should be taught, it should be a way to educate young people, especially on a lot of the traumas that was brought to African Americans during slavery, during Jim Crow, and a lot of these things. You know, it was frowned upon. It was saying that we don't need to put our kids through, white kids especially, through any kind of trauma to make them feel less than or make them feel guilty. And so it was frowned upon and said that we don't need to do that. Yet they come back, the politicians come back and say, we know Milwaukee needs money, but in order for us to give you the money that you need to eliminate the Fire and Police Commission. You need to eliminate race as a way of when you're hiring people. We want all references to race taken out. We want to do away with all of these things. Doesn't it seem to, from a lawyer standpoint, doesn't that seem like a reverse way of doubling down and saying, not only are we not going to even have a discussion on critical race theory, but we're going to take away all things that deal with race, all things that could potentially impact police officers, all things that could do any kind of harm to the people that we care about. Doesn't it seem that way to you?
Well, I was nice to be asked by a journalist what I'm thinking as a lawyer. And, I think I do bring a unique perspective on that question. I was hired by the city of Milwaukee to defend Chief Flynn when he had fired Officer Manny, who was involved with the death.
Right.
And I agreed to represent the chief in that situation because he had fired someone for engaging in an illegal Terry stop, meaning he didn't have reasonable suspicion to interrupt Dontre Hamilton's day. And there is right there, that's this, you tie it to this race-based question, right? You have an African-American downtown in the park not doing anything, and he ends up dead. And I want to come back to this in much, much more depth on the other side of this break, because I think it's very important and I'll address it as a lawyer, how you teed up the question of how is this related to the attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion and the UW system, that you brought it up and you tied that to the Fire and Police Commission in Milwaukee. And I do think from a legal point of view, that is a very, very powerful question. Folks, I'm here with journalist James Causey. Come on back with us as we explore what's going on with the attempt to eliminate the Fire and Police Commission in Milwaukee. Welcome back, folks. This is attorney Mark Thomsen, and this is your Paul Revere Show. We are here every Monday night from 7 p.m. to 8 on WAUK 540 AM, 101 FM. I'm honored to have with us tonight journalist, well-respected, well-recognized James Causey, and we're talking about a provision in the shared revenue bill statewide that it essentially guts the Milwaukee Fire and Police Commission. And how is it that ends up, this local control bill ends up in a state bill tied with money? And James, as a journalist, had asked me pointedly to legally look at, isn't this really an attack on essentially equal protection and equity in the state? And James, I've been thinking about this over the break. I think it's a direct attack. You talk about that we have this attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion in the statewide, and meaning, do we want all our children to really learn history, the true facts of history, right?
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Right. And so they don't want the truth taught. They want a diverted mythological white view of history as opposed to real facts. And it's not lost on me. On May 4th, 2021, right? Just barely 2 years ago, the Milwaukee Common Council approved a settlement with Sterling Brown, and the Milwaukee Fire and Police Commission shortly afterwards adopted some of the most progressive anti-racist policing policies in the United States. The MPD Standard Operating Procedure number 001 requires that all police members shall be anti-racist and anti-discriminatory, and that MPD is committed to the implementation of anti-racist and anti-discriminatory policies. So you have a quarter century of work going into developing what's a good policy that addresses race squarely on, and how do we make it fair and equitable? And if you recall, just recently, the Fire and Police Commission just adopted the 15-day rule to let the public see body cams, because we want to be transparent and let the public know what the police are doing to build trust amongst all our communities. And just when that is happening, those are the facts, then we have this, in my mind, far-right Republican Party trying to gut those provisions and just take it away from the city. And to me, it's outrageous. But here's the question. A lot of my friends and acquaintances, there's like too much silence on this issue. Mm-hmm. That's, as a journalist, so I'm asking you, why do you think we don't have an outcry against this?
Well, it's simple. I think there's only so much outrage to go around. Like there's almost like you almost have so much in expendable dollars, right? You only have so much money. So if you have $100 and you want to go to a Bucks game and go out to eat and maybe do something else afterwards, you only have so much money. So you're going to have to cut one of those things out. And I think that's how we deal with outrage in this city, because there's so many things going on. And I think a lot of people have a hard time figuring out what to be outraged at, especially when it's not really thoroughly explained. When we started this conversation, you read some of what the Fire and Police Commission does, some of their duties. And when you think about their duties and what they're responsible for, why would you want that eliminated? Think about that. Why would you want something as important as the Fire and Police Commission eliminated at a point in time in history that we're in right now? We're just over George Floyd, and I don't think we'll ever truly be over it, but we just had marches and protests and things like that over George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And there was talks about defunding police, or police looking at different ways to do things. There's been new policies and new training techniques and things like that implemented. And with all of that, those positive steps that have taken place, even Milwaukee's even has a Black police chief, but all those positive things that have taken place in this city, the comeback is, we don't need that. Milwaukee doesn't need a Fire and Police Commission. So when you think where that's coming from too, it's not coming from local leaders. It's coming from outside of the city. And, those decisions are being made by people who live in the Polk counties and these small little towns and things like that, who are able to dictate what we do here in our city. People who have probably never really set foot in our city, or only know our city through what they see on news. When you think about the impact that someone in a small little town can have over something as important as the Fire and Police Commission, or as important as diversity and inclusion rules that we have here, that's a lot of power for some people to have. And I think where Milwaukee is, we're stuck because we need the money. We're being crushed by this pension crisis. You look around, we can't keep doing things the way we're doing it. Everything keeps going up, and we're stuck. But this is a time to really fight back. And I urge the mayor, who has been doing a wonderful job on working across the aisles and really trying to talk with state officials, to really say, we can't do that. That's something that we just simply can't do. And honestly, this is the first time that the Fire and Police Commission has had a full board, full 9 members in forever. I can't remember. And I covered the Fire and Police Commission for decades, going back to the early 1990s when I covered the cop beat. So, we finally see what the Fire and Police Commission can be. We're seeing some of the actions that they're taking. To eliminate it right now would be terrible for our city, right? And it will be no coming back from that.
Yeah, to me, I think about it, and that's why I'm really honored to have you here to talk about it, because it seems to me that as a community and as a state, we should really talk through. We have an institution that was created in 1885 to protect citizens from the politics of politicians and mayors using police chiefs and police officers and firefighters as political patronage, right? I mean, it had corrupted cities, and we're free of that. And not, as you said, we have now 9 members, and we have a fully functioning commission. And, we're here.
And think about this, Mark. When you really think about it, the police department, they have a serious trust issue issues right now. As some people of color don't trust police. Police don't really work well with them, and this has been something that's been long standing, and even when we make inroads into solving some of those deep rooted wounds, something usually rears its ugly head and we're back at square one. Eliminating the Fire and Police Commission will open up that cut, and I don't think it could be closed again. It's almost akin to when they opened up the policy to allow police officers and firefighters to live wherever they wanted to live. It was talked about at first that, most of them will stay in the city. I don't think many people will move. Well, look at what's happened. I mean, half the firefighters and police officers don't even live in the city that they serve, that they work in. And so we're losing like a lot of that tax base. We're losing, not seeing them at our stores, shopping in our areas and those kind of things, because they live in the Sherwoods, they live in the, Oak Creeks and places like that. And I think if we keep going in this direction, it won't be good for this city.
I'm glad you brought up the home rule decision. That was 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And the then very conservative Supreme Court ruled that Milwaukee's provisions were unconstitutional. And it seems to me that that's one of these questions that's ripe for the court again, because that completely reversed long standing tradition that municipalities had local control and could require their public servants, their employees, to live within the city limits. And you're right. The impact was to allow folks to leave the city or not even be part of our community. And it has given this, sort of like an occupier force, which is really not useful for developing trust. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say Byron Stevenson, who wrote the book Just Mercy, attorney, once said, in order to properly address an issue, you have to be close to it. It has to be tangible to you. You have to be there. When police officers and firefighters and teachers don't live in a place where they serve, they live elsewhere, you lose some connection. You lose that connective tissue. The city loses mentors, and the city loses role models. The city loses people who could be coaches at high school basketball games and these type of events, because they're doing this in a suburban area. It has these effects that most people don't really see, but you know it when it's not there. So when you have a city that, you talk about mentorship and things like that, when you have a city that lacks mentors, positive mentors, and it lacks like these strong leaders, well, that's because half of them no longer live here, even though they collect a check from here. I think that has some effect on what we're seeing taking place today.
And I think you're dead on right there, that because this is sort of where the dollar also meets. Part of the crisis, or the alleged crisis, and I'm when we come back after the break, I want to get a little bit more into this, because I think that the numbers have been thrust upon Milwaukee unfairly, and it's aggravated the crisis. But a lot of the discussion is about pensions, and people are taking their pension money from city taxpayers and living outside the city. Right? And so, you don't want to let us have our employees in town of our own community, and you say you believe in local control, but when it comes to Milwaukee and folks of color, that doesn't work. And then you say you got to deal with the money on the pensions. So the money is going to the pensions, and folks are taking the dollars out of the city. I mean, that's what I call sort of the con game that is going on. And I'm trying to figure out why more of my friends aren't talking about this con game. So, folks, I'm here with journalist James Causey. We're talking about the abolition or the attempt to abolish the Fire and Police Commission in Milwaukee and what's at stake to not only Milwaukee folks, but the whole state in terms of local control. This is Attorney Mark Thomsen. This is your Paul Revere Show. We'll be right back. Welcome back, folks. This is Attorney Mark Thomsen. This is your Paul Revere Show. We are here, WAUK 540 AM, 101 FM, every Monday night from 7 to 8. I am honored and privileged to have well-respected journalist James Causey with us tonight, and we're talking about how is it that we have this provision buried in this shared revenue bill that's part of this whole budget process that eliminates Milwaukee's Fire and Police Commission, an institution that's been around since 1885. And if we're talking that we believe in democracy and local control, how is it that this can just happen without a full public debate? So, James, you had mentioned that folks needed the money, right? Mm-hmm. That my friends who've been elected, running the city of Milwaukee, say we got to have the money, otherwise we're going to go bankrupt. Mm-hmm. And so there is this, and I mean, frankly, the talk is that Speaker Voss has told politicians in Milwaukee, if you speak up about elections, if you speak up about the Supreme Court race, we're not going to give you your pennies. I think one thing that hit me, and I don't know whether you saw it, but Bruce Murphy, in his Murphy's Law on May 8th, he wrote a piece and he talks, and I just want to quote him on the dollars because it really gets at this myth about the dollars. He says, but in the last 25 years, mostly under the Republican legislature, that revenue has been slashed. And then he quotes Tim Sheehy from the Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce. This is not a left-wing, person, right? This is someone who runs business in the state. Noted in a memo to its membership that state income tax collections rose from $3 billion to $9 billion since 2000, yet state shared revenue didn't triple, but was actually slashed. So even though we have more money collected, the legislative policy has been to gut municipalities. He said shared revenue to the city of Milwaukee declined from $240 million in 2000 to $230 million in 2023. And Tim Sheehy said if this payment had kept pace with inflation, it would be $420 million. $420 million. And I think, to me, that if the public and my listeners and all of us would think about it, we would realize we just won a huge race in April, right? Janet Protasewicz is going to be the next Supreme Court justice. We have a shot at fair maps. We have just won a huge step in democracy to get over gerrymandered, this tyranny of Voss and company. And it's like their last gasp is to gut Milwaukee before we get fair maps again. And it seems to me this is not the time to surrender and put up the white flag. What are you hearing about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting, and I like the way you put that. It's not time to wave the white flag by any means, but if you think about what Bruce Murphy said, it almost sounds like my home. My home on 39th and Capitol had my home had it developed equity like a home would in Mequon, I would be a lot better off than I am right now. But that's neither here nor there. I think what we're seeing, though, is like, I don't want our leaders and our leadership to feel that they're stuck. I think there's still room for negotiation, even though Voss said that there's no longer he doesn't want to talk anymore. He's ready to move forward. I think we need to have further discussion, and I think we need to stress how important Milwaukee is, the largest city, the largest economic provider to the state. We need to stress those points, because if Milwaukee fails, the state will fail. And Milwaukee can't fail. And I think people don't understand that to the degree, because, usually the media focuses on a lot of the negative that takes place in this city, but there's a lot of good that takes place in this city too. And I think they need to understand that Milwaukee cannot fail. So I've had these talks with some of my editors on the editorial board, and I'm willing to say, let's go back to the table and negotiate, because I don't think this is a fair deal for the city.
So I think that's really important what you pointed out. It's not over. This discussion is still out there. And I think part of, and why I'm really thankful that you're here tonight, is to help tell this story to Wisconsinites, that we have this very, very important institution, and this provision and the discussion it shouldn't be there, right? That Fire and Police Commission and mandating that the MPS has to keep 25 officers.
Yeah. None of those things have anything to do with how the cake is made.
No, yeah, but that's why I read this history, right? At the beginning, they got the Fire and Police Commission so you wouldn't have this cronyism, right?
Right.
We do have the Milwaukee Police Union that is pushing this, and it is pure cronyism, right?
Of course, that's exactly what it is.
And so why should anyone, even white folks from small communities, want that kind of cronyism to exist in their state, much less in their city that generates the economy that helps the state run?
Because people in other counties don't care about this city. They don't care about Milwaukee. And that's why. And they think that anything that takes place that the Republicans come up with, it's fine with them, because it doesn't affect them in the same way that it affects us. So that's why.
So here, you got 30 seconds. As a journalist, what do you say to folks, listeners, whether they're in Waukesha or in Milwaukee, on this issue?
Why would less representation be better for a city instead of more representation? They don't want less representation in their city, so why would they want less representation in ours? Simple as that.
Thank you, James Causey. Folks, we're talking about the Fire and Police Commission and why it shouldn't be part of this shared revenue debate. Please call your legislatures, read up. We need to move forward. We cannot go back. We cannot give up the Milwaukee Fire and Police Commission. Thank you, James Causey. We'll be back next week.
Thank you.